Support for this episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere is made possible by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com. And the Baker Street Journal, the leading publication of Sherlockian scholarship since 1946. Subscriptions available at bakerstreetjournal.com.
I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 131, the all-new Sherlockian.net.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became a chronicler.
In a world where it's always 1895, comes I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we discuss goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes enthusiasts, the Baker Street irregulars, and popular culture related to the great detective.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Burt Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
And welcome once again to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
And I'm Burt Wolder.
And you know, I have to admit to this, we lied to you in episode 130. I don't know how you let us get away with this.
Impossible.
I know. We promised you an author this time around. And while our guest has written a few things, has authored some serious papers, she's not the author of the book that we had intended. So, bear with us. We will still have that author very shortly. But in the meantime...
And I was horribly confused. I thought it was Arthur, and I thought... I thought it was just going to be more about Conan Doyle. Color me down.
Oh, that Arthur! Hobson! I thought you meant the other Arthur. I drink, I play tennis, and I fondle women. But I have weekends off, and I'm my own boss.
Not that Arthur, huh?
Oh, very good. Poor old Dudley.
It's what I live for, sir. No, we do have the other author coming. Before we do talk about our guest today, whom you will get an intro for very shortly, just a reminder, you can find us here at I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere on our website, ihearofsherlock.com. Any of the socials, whether you're on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, the same moniker gets us in every single one of those places. And it is simply, I Hear of Sherlock. Mm-hmm. I believe we have an email address, and that is comment@ihearofsherlock.com. We even have a phone number for folks that still know how to press those buttons.
No, nobody press. You just have to say, hey, Siri, get me 774-221-READ. That's 774-221-7323.
You know what? I'll bet that would work with Siri or Alexa or Google Home at some point. We should talk to someone about programming that in. And even asking someone to write thank you iHose on the bottom of an Alexa and mailing it to us. That would work too.
Yeah. You could do it on the bottom of an Amazon Echo, but you have to write it twice.
Convincing, cursive, cacophony.
The 3C.
Well, but if you don't want to write to us, and we can understand that, we can understand you not wanting to bother with stopping what you're doing right now, putting down your pen or putting down your phone, and getting onto another device and typing a note out to us. We understand that. Who are we to interrupt your busy day? I mean, you're here for the entertainment. You're not here to play pen pal. But if you're not going to do that, at least send us some money. And
Yes.
you can do that with PayPal or Patreon. If you value the content that you hear here, you decide. You tell us how much it's worth. And most people have, unfortunately.
Now, wait a minute. Let me make sure I understand this. So if you're not here to play Pen Pal, you can play PayPal.
Yes.
And we want you to hear the content. Is that basically the gist of it?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Hey, it all works. But if you wanna head over to our site, ihearofsherlock.com, and hit one of those buttons, PayPal or Patreon, and tell us what you think of the show by supporting us monetarily, we'd appreciate that. It helps us with all the fees associated with hosting and email providers and all the rest. So thank you very much in advance. Now, we do have an update on a topic from the last episode where we talked with Don Terrace from the Hounds of the Baskerville Sick. We talked with him, of course, about the Hounds' 75th anniversary. And Don was explaining how he had updated an existing history of the Hounds by John, I'm going to butcher his last name, Neminsky, I believe it is.
Close enough.
And yeah, John Neminsky. And Don came up with a 75th anniversary edition called A History of the Hounds of the Baskerville Sick, 1943 to 2017. And that publication is now available to you. So you didn't have to just attend the dinner to receive that book. You can actually order a copy for yourself. It is in the post on ihearofsherlock.com that immediately precedes the show notes here. So it is the one posted on October 29th. This was posted on October 30th. So check that out. The order form is there. I believe the book is $32, and they will send it right out to you. Now, speaking of Sherlockian meetings, and I know Don talked with us about allowing women in at the Hounds of the Baskerville. Did you happen to make it up to Philadelphia on Friday?
I did make it up to Philadelphia on Friday. And Bob Katz did a wonderful job as head mastiff at the Friday, October 27th meeting of the Speckled Band of the Sons of the Copper Beeches, which is a milestone meeting because for the first time in its history, the Science Society welcomed women around the table in the basement of the Tavern Club, which is itself obviously a co-ed institution. We welcomed a great number of Sherlockian women, and it was no, I'm sorry, not the Tavern Club, the Racket Club, in the tavern-like environs of the Racket Club down there in Philadelphia. We had a wonderful meeting, and it brought in some old friends, some people who participate in the meeting of that particular Science Society from time to time, but not regularly. And we had Mike Whalen, we had Marianne Bradley, we had Tim Greer. We had many of our friends from Baltimore. We had, of course, because of its Philadelphia location, our pal Rebecca Romney. Excellent. We had members of the Ancient Order of Free Sherlockians, which is another local Philadelphia scion formed by Anastasia Klimchinskaya.
Easy for you to say.
It is, and Anastasia was there along with Ed Pettit from the Rosenbach, which is now running, by the way, a wonderful exhibition that I haven't yet seen on Frankenstein and Dracula. And I heard Les Klinger had just been up to talk a little bit about Frankenstein and Dracula at the Rosenbach. And, of course, Stephen Rothman and Ray Betzner and all of the usual suspects. But it was a grand meeting. It was very festive. And our newly invited female fraternity performed all of the toasts.
Oh, wow.
For the evening, led by our instantiated Toastmaster Peter Blau, who did his usual great job. And it was, and our pal James O'Leary was there too.
Great.
And it was a wonder. It was a very friendly meeting. And folks, if you are part of that community that wonders about the populating and increasing the size of participation at Sherlockian meetings, you don't have to wonder much more from the experience of what had been an all-male fraternity to a now happily co-ed fraternity, because we had almost 60 people at the meeting. There wasn't there wasn't an empty chair.
That's great.
It was really very, very festive. And I was just looking over. And Susan Rice and Mickey Fromkin came up from New York.
Oh, wonderful.
And that was really wonderful.
Yeah.
And Susan was one of the people who were inveigled into giving a toast, and she gave a particularly excellent toast. And we had our pal Karen Wilson came up from Baltimore, and she gave a singing toast to Violet Hunter, which was particularly good. So it was a grand meeting, some very good papers. We had a wonderful paper on Sherlock Holmes' single-stick capabilities and the sport and art of single-stick combat, or single-stick as basically a fencing mechanism, how it compared to fencing. And Rebecca gave a great talk on Dr. Watson's library, among other things. So it was a very festive, very festive.
Well, I'm sorry I missed it.
What, you mean you weren't there?
I know, with all those people, it's not surprising. I could have been overlooked easily.
Right, I thought I saw you there. Yeah.
Wonderful.
Great section.
Well, good. Well, speaking of rich and enriching, that screams to me Wessex Press.
The ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom of Wessex is amused as we watch the Englanders try to figure out Brexit. We are firmly committed to remain in Europe, and we're ready to start building our embassies. But we have not yet heard back from the Cimbri or the Teutons. They may still be recovering from the Second Punic War. But as we wait, the weeks will fly by because we have copies of a curious collection of dates through the year with Sherlock Holmes from our WessexPress.com. It highlights every day of the year with significant events from the Sherlockian universe. And New Year's Day will be the perfect time to turn to page 1. Friends, it's the time of year when yellow leaves, or none, or few, do hang upon those boughs which shake against the cold. In these days of autumn splendor, reach for the pleasure only a volume from the Wessex Press can provide. Choose yours today.
Wow. Still figuring out Brexit.
Yeah, those Englanders. But I think the ancient Anglo-Saxon kingdom has got it all figured out.
Indeed they do.
Although they're just pointing to the west, waiting for those pigeons, to come from Scandinavia back with a message about their embassies. They may be waiting a little while.
Well, as I open my curious collection of dates to tomorrow, October 31st, you'll never guess whose birthday it is.
Well, tomorrow, October 31st. Whose birthday is it?
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you ready? It's absolutely true. Now, we don't have any actual canonical evidence of this date. I think it's one of those that it was picked based on personality and based on career choice. It is the birthday in 1846 of one Professor James Moriarty, which, it was absolutely astounding that he was born a professor.
His mother must have had something in mind. That's why there's so many James. What are we going to call the boy, Margaret? I want to name him Professor. But what about... What if we should have another boy? Oh, let's call him Colonel.
Colonel, yes. Colonel and Professor. Oh, boy.
What should his second name be, dear? Well, I don't know, James. Why don't we call him John? No, that won't work. Let's call him James. So that's it. Yeah, Professor James and Colonel James.
There you go.
Must have been.
Well, Jamie and Leah claim in the book here that in Baring Gould's research into the lives of Professor Moriarty and Sherlock Holmes and the rest, he determined that, of course, Moriarty's birthday fell on Halloween because he really doesn't seem like the Christmas type of person. So there you go. Well,
I wonder when Dracula's birthday is.
Oh, that's a good question.
Should ask Les.
Yeah. I'll have to go way back. We did talk with Les Klinger about Dracula on episode 47. If you want a Halloween-themed show, that's one to check out. ihose.co/ihose47. But this show, you can find the show notes for this episode at ihose.co/ihose131. And it is the one where we talk with Liza Potts. Now, Liza Potts, you say, that's not a Sherlockian we've heard of quite many times before. Well, you're going to hear about her certainly today, but you're going to hear about her again and again. Liza is an associate professor in the Department of Writing, Rhetoric, and American Cultures at Michigan State University. And she's the director of the WIDE Research Center and the co-founder of the Experience Architecture undergraduate degree program. Her research interests include digital rhetoric, social user experience, and participatory culture. Liza is the past chair of the Association for Computer Machinery's Special Interest Group on Design Communication and a member of the steering committee for the award-winning Women in Technical Communication. She's worked for Microsoft, consultancies, and startups as a director, user experience architect, and project manager. And now she is the caretaker and project leader of Sherlockian.net. Liza, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Well,
it's a pleasure to finally be on this, to be honest.
Well,
that won't last very long.
Well, I feel like it had to be earned. So
being on or the pleasure?
It could be both.
Yeah.
We'll see how it goes.
This could be good. Well, you're a fellow Michigander, so that's what makes this all the more interesting.
Indeed. I'm a Michigander now.
And we want to talk about your Michigan roots and everything, but why don't we start by you telling us how you first met Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, sure. So I grew up with a dad who probably back then in the 80s would be considered pretty nerdy and geeky. And he liked to introduce me to all of his great loves. And one of his great loves was Sherlock Holmes, along with Doctor Who and Star Trek and Star Wars and those sorts of things. But he always had a copy of the Adventures. And when I was about 8 or 9 years old, he introduced me and read The Speckled Band to me. And then we started watching Jeremy Brett together on weekends on PBS. It was either PBS or maybe at VHS tapes. I don't even remember anymore. But being able to, even now, watch Jeremy Brett with my kids is such a pleasure and connects me with sort of those rainy Florida afternoons in the summer where we would just kick back and watch together or talk about things. And it just kind of blossomed from there. I read as much more as I could get my hands on in between, doing sci-fi and fantasy and that sort of stuff. But I always came back to Sherlock Holmes. And I love detective fiction. And even when I was in college, I was an English major. And one of my favorite writing instructors taught a course on detective fiction, and it was like candy. It was the coolest class I ever took. And it was just amazing to me that you could take a class just to read things like Wilkie Collins, Edgar Allan Poe, of course, and then, of course, Conan Doyle. And that was just awesome and amazing. So that's really my origin story, I guess you would say.
Well, now I have a couple of questions about this origin story, but first about this survey course in detective fiction. So you said Wilkie, so I can imagine that it started in Poe, Wilkie Collins, and so on. Where did it end? What was the scope of the syllabus, as it were? Did it go into Mike Hammer and things like that? Or
no, I think around P.D. James. She stopped us around there. We did read. We looked at Maltese Falcon and things like that, and sort of the hard-boiled detective and things like that. But she wanted to bring us up to more modern authors too. But it was just fantastic. We would read a book or two a week or a few short stories a week and just come in and it was the most delightful course I took. It was wonderful.
Oh, I took
an all for credit. Wow.
I know.
If somebody could have given me 3 credits for reading detective stories, I'd have multiple PhDs at this point.
Well, I took a very similar course at Boston University, and same kind of thing. It began with Poe and Collins, but then we went we went through P.D. James, and I have his carcass was one of them.
That's Dorothy
Sayers. Dorothy Sayers, and then into P.D. James, sorry.
Yeah.
But we hit Raymond Chandler along the way, Dashiell Hammett, and then I think the latest that we read was The Ghost Way by Tony Hillerman.
Ooh.
Which was fantastic. It was part of the Jim Chee series. Jim Chee being a Native American detective. So
okay,
just very, very, and it was all set obviously in the American Southwest. So same kind of formula, but just placed in a new setting essentially.
Right.
But it was interesting to see those themes common throughout, whether it was Philip Marlowe or the Thin Man or what have you, Lord Peter.
Yeah. She also had us read some Ellis Peters, which I think she had me do that since I loved all things medieval. So I think she was trying to find something in there for me.
Nice.
So that was delightful too.
That's great. Well, now I've got one more question. So you say that you've been showing the Jeremy Brett Sherlock to your children.
Yes.
So how old are they, and what do they make of it?
I've got a 6-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 15-year-old, and they absolutely love it. And it's almost like comfort food to them, because their grandfather passed away before they were born. But they know that it's sort of this family tradition that we have to read these stories and to watch Jeremy Brett. And it really is comfort food to them. They like going back. We have them on DVD, but we have them through Amazon, things like that. And if it's a rainy day or if they've just had a down day, they just kind of want to put it on and enjoy it. So it's interesting how that's worked out.
Wonderful.
And do you have a favorite episode among you as a family?
Oh, I think we'd probably fight over that, to be honest. Although Speckled Band is still a family favorite. It really is.
That's a good one. What's your personal favorite?
A personal favorite? Oh. I don't know, because they all have different memories associated with them. Like, we've been on road trips where we will watch these as a way to relax on road trips in between watching, you can only listen to Moana or Frozen so many times. I don't know. I think I like it all. I really like HOUN. HOUN does something for me. Something about the Moors. I don't think I could pick.
That's fair.
How wonderful, though. It's grand that you've been successful at, and it's also, your children's inclination in making that connection. That's wonderful.
Yeah, he's just in the pantheon of, the superheroes that they're into and all that. Sherlock Holmes is in that pantheon for them. So, which is wonderful. And my both daughters have traveled to London with us, so they've both been to the Sherlock Holmes Museum.
Oh, wow.
And the last time I went to London was a year ago. Over the summer, I'd led a study abroad. And part of that study abroad was studying and looking at different fandoms across Ireland and Wales and England. And, of course, one of them that we studied and looked at was Sherlock Holmes. So Katie, my middle daughter, brought a copy of Adventures with her and read it pretty much cover to cover while we were there. And she just delighted in going into the museum because she was a little older than when she had gone previously and studied everything and took 30 million pictures of everything. So she was totally stuck into it and just thought it was amazing.
That's wonderful.
So tell us a little more. Give us a couple more sentences about this study abroad. So what was the group that you were with there?
I took a fantastic group From Michigan State University. They're in our writing and rhetoric program. So there's our department is called Writing, Rhetoric, and American Cultures. And inside of that, we have a major called Professional Writing. And then there's also a major in the college that's managed through our department called Experience Architecture. And it's all around the professional writing one is all about how can you do editing and publishing or even social media or web design development. And the experience architecture degree is around how do you create experiences for people, usually having some sort of technology involved, whether it's the experience of an app or a website or a campaign of some sort. And so what I was trying to do was tap into a topic that I knew students would be interested in and use that to talk about how we tell stories about different cultures and create experiences for them. So we began in Ireland, which was fantastic. We went to a storytelling dinner in one of the oldest pubs in Dublin, which set the stage really nicely about how do you tell stories, how do people understand stories, and how they kept their culture alive through oral histories and oral storytelling. And then we came over to England and went to London for a week, and that was fantastic. It was mainly focused on Sherlock Holmes, but also things around Harry Potter, and they're of the generation that grew up with Harry Potter. So we went to the studio tour and talked about how you could look at sets and create an experience out of that, and what sort of interactivity was in different parts of the studio tour. Then we visited, obviously, the Sherlock Holmes Museum, but then we also went to St. Bartholomew's Hospital, where fans of Sherlock have drawn and written support on the police box, the phone box that's right outside of St. Bart's. And they've also written in dust and dirt that's on the windows because that part of the hospital is no longer in use. So it was really interesting to sort of get them stuck into those places. And then we went to Norfolk and Norwich to a fan studies conference where they got to hear sort of the things I had been telling them over the last few weeks. They got to hear about that from professional academics. And then we ended the tour in Wales, in Cardiff, to look at the Doctor Who fandom and go to a memorial that's there for Torchwood, which is more of I would say the adult version of Doctor Who. For grown-ups primarily. And there's a memorial dedicated there to one of the characters who was killed that is kept up and respected by the local government and by the people that own that space. So that was sort of our shining moment where everything kind of came together.
Wow.
So which character? You mean a Torchwood character that was killed?
Yes, a Torchwood character that was killed. Spoilers.
I never followed Torchwood nearly as much as I followed the Doctor.
It was good. It was very different. So it follows Captain Jack and the Torchwood group that stays there in Cardiff. So it's an interesting space to visit and sort of see how many years later fans have kept up this space and really respected the space, curated it, and have taken care of it.
Yeah. That's wonderful. And the St. Bart's visit, I mean, that is effectively like a whole generation's version of Reichenbach Falls.
Right.
You didn't even have to go to Switzerland for that.
No. And we actually did. We had a couple of the students who were with us become very emotional in that space.
Well, I'll bet.
They stood back where John stood, where Sherlock had jumped, and then they came towards St. Bart's from that direction because they wanted to feel sort of that full effect of what it would have been like, which is interesting. And became very emotional about being there, which was awesome.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
So all of this is just kind of great context behind the WIDE Research Center, which is, as you said, Writing, Rhetoric, and American Cultures.
Yeah, that's the name of our department. And then, so WIDE's concern is mainly around looking at sort of spaces and places and understanding how people have social experiences using technology and how we might be able to enhance that or increase that experience. So WIDE stands for Writing, Information, and Digital Experience.
Okay.
And that's mainly what we concern ourselves. And a lot of our projects that we do have some sort of a social good behind it, wanting to sort of help do what we can to sort of inspire the next generation of researchers and thinkers around how can you take on good projects that have some sort of a social good component to it.
Well, that makes it kind of a prime target then for the project that we're here to talk about, which is, of course, Christopher Redmond's baby. And if you haven't listened to episode 99 yet, that was our interview with Christopher Redmond. Folks, you can check that out at ihose.co/ihose99, where we got into all things Christopher Redmond, but he, of course, established this fantastic site, fantastic resource, Sherlockian.net, in the 1990s. And he got to a point in, I guess it was somewhere in early to mid 2016, where he decided it was time for him to retire and to step away from the site. And he had a number of options. He thought, well, I could just let it go and leave it to the tumbleweeds of the internet. I could hand it over to an individual and have them continue on the same way I have. I could have it archived, hand it over to some institution, or I could see if there's some way to have it updated and continue to exist as a living, breathing kind of being. And he was weighing all of these options, and suddenly he decided that it was going to WIDE, the Wide Research Center at the University at Michigan State University. How did that happen? Connect the dots for us here, Liza.
Sure. Well, I guess a little bit to give you a little bit of background of what came before this. I had a project where I was very interested in looking at spaces in which women held leadership roles, and they were building organizations that were built by women for women. And this was a project because in my own field, we have about a number of different organizations, and we turned around and they were all led by women, which happened for the first time ever in my field. And I'm in technical communication. And we created a new group called Women in TechCom. And it was created to support other women across our field and help with mentorship and advice and so forth, an agency, and working on issues of equality and equity. And that was a great project. At the same time, I stumbled into helping a group called Ladies That UX. They are an organization that is now international all around the world. They began with just two women in outside of London getting together to have a drink and going, hey, we're women and we work in user experience. There aren't many of us. Why don't we get together and have a drink? And it spread across the world. And I was working on a project with them to help them essentially to figure out how to cross the chasm. How do you go from a small organization to a larger organization? And that was a fantastic research project. And then I somehow stumbled upon 221BCon and started to interview Crystal Knoll and that crew and learn more about how did they create that group. And I went to a 221BCon, and it was the first time I had shown up at a con where there were more women than men. And I was trying to figure out what was going on and how this dynamic was in general very different. So I was starting to keep in touch with the community. To me, my own personal running joke with all of this is I've been a Sherlockian since I was 8 or 9 years old. I had no idea there were groups out there of people also really interested in this. What have I been doing with my life?
How sad.
So I know it really is depressing to be honest.
And you call yourself a Sherlock.
Man. Slacking away with this women in leadership and doing prominent things. How dare you, right?
Exactly.
The sad part is you always miss, the good old days. Those are always 6 months or a year before you get engaged. And in Sherlockian terms, that's when you miss all the free money handout, the rolls of thousands and $5,000
yeah, sure.
in cash that were used to giving away, to new Sherlockians. We're sad you missed that.
I'm so sorry.
I think I missed that too, Bert.
Oh, well, forget I said anything.
Which is a great time to remind people about PayPal and Patreon if you want to. No.
well done.
Franz, peel off a couple of those for extra pound notes and send it to I Hear of Sherlock.
So I had started following everyone on Twitter, and also I was going back and forth in London and working on, I have another project going on with looking at fans and fan communities. I was building a digital book, which should be out later this year. So I had connected with all these Sherlockians on Twitter who were in London, and I started noticing who was following who and trying to understand what this network was and what people were doing, because it was awesome and fascinating. And I happened to see Chris's tweet. And his tweet was essentially, I'm not sure what to do with this. I was thinking about I might shut it down. I don't know if anyone wants to take it. And the moment I saw that, I mean, it was sort of like my heart stopped for a moment, because Sherlockian.net was a very important resource for me. Just being able to understand the community of people that were involved in this and being able to find resources to do my own research. So the thought of it going away was very upsetting, or even the thought of Sherlockian.net becoming a URL to sell something, schlocky, that wasn't a good feeling either. So very quickly, I sent a direct message to Tim Johnson, and I was like, do you want to take this on? Is this something that University of Minnesota would want to take on and manage? And we went back and forth a little bit, and I understood that they're primarily concerned with the physical stacks, that they can make sure that they're archiving and being good citizen archivists and librarians, and working with those sorts of people on physical objects. So I went, okay, here's the deal. Looking up all this stuff and reading so much, I would consider myself a Sherlockian, but I'm no expert by any means, especially when I talk to others. I know I've read these things, but the level of knowledge out there is just awesome and amazing to me. But what I do know how to do is build websites and do organize material and help rewrite material. And I know it would be a fantastic student project, because I teach courses on content strategy, information architecture, and just sort of writing online. So this just looked like a fantastic opportunity also for Michigan State University to be able to connect a project that is out in the world with a community, with our students. So I said to Chris, it belongs in a museum. I did an Indiana Jones, and
so do you, Dr. Jones.
Exactly. Because I thought, if I took it on as a person, I could have the same problems that Chris had. But if I take this on as an academic, then this becomes another focus and area of research for us. And rather than it being something we would do in our spare time, it would be something that's central to what we're doing. And we could devote the time and care that something like this would need. I clearly didn't know what I was getting myself into. But that's how it happened. And we really began with the students investigating and looking at all the different pieces and parts of the site and showing them, how do you map an entire website? Like, how does that work? And they would try different pieces of software and not be able to get all the pages to map right. And they'd be like, what is going on here? And I'm like, wow, that's, they're not connected in the way that you're used to websites being connected. And this started a long time ago.
Well, that's just it. And I guess it's worth pausing here so folks understand. This isn't written in some kind of blogging language. It's not like it's a WordPress site or hasn't been a WordPress site for 20 some odd years. I guess it's almost 25 years it's been around.
Yeah.
And it just became Frankensteined over time. So it was and how many pages or how many
Hundreds.
And links?
Hundreds.
How many links were there in the site?
I want to say there's about 1,000 links.
Wow. So it's a digital Gordian knot of sorts that your students had to figure out how to untie.
And it's great. Because, we had a good conversation about what do you do when people obviously part of what was happening to Chris is someone would come along and say, there's this really cool thing. Can you put it on the site? And that's how it just kind of grew organically. Yeah. So we talked about, like, what do you do when you're given the gift of having a moment to re-architect something?
Right.
Like, that is such a huge gift. And so, we spent the last year, but students go away over the summer and semesters ebb and flow. So, it's a lot less time than that, but it has been a year since we started working on it. And to have that luxury of time, because there was no sort of urgency. If people had updates for the original site, we would go and update them if they had new links or something they wanted to tell us about. But we had the luxury of being able to look at all these different sections and pages and chunks of information and really think, how would someone want this represented? So it gave us the opportunity to interview people, to go out. We went to different events. We went to our local event for the Greek interpreters, which my students have actually had a blast at. They thought it was awesome. But I also went back to 221BCon. I went to Scintillation of Scions. I went to an ASH meeting, which was amazing and awesome. And sort of having these opportunities to talk to people and find out, what do you want to stay there? What do you wish it had? What makes you nervous about the new site? What makes you excited about it? And what do you look for? How have you used it in the past? And getting to hear people's stories about that was a privilege and awesome, to then think about, how are we going to take all this information, all these things that we learned, and create a space that's really inviting. So for me, when I first started figuring out, hey, there's a bunch of awesome people, how do I find out more about them and go to their events so I could learn more? I wasn't quite sure how to do that. And so part of what we're doing here with the site is trying to invite people to participate in different ways. So that's why there's all these action verbs that are in here: investigating, adapting, celebrating, teaching, sharing. Is we want people to feel welcome and that they're actively involved in becoming a part of something, right? And so that's how we hope the site is represented now. And we expect that it's something that we're going to continue to improve upon and grow as people find information that they want to share with us. We have had people come to us with long, giant list of things, wanting us to figure out how to manage them. And, we're looking at several different projects right now and thinking about what we might want to incorporate. But I'm ridiculously proud of our students and what they've been able to accomplish over the last year and how thoughtful they've been about this community.
Yeah.
And, could you tell us a little bit more about the conclusions that they came to? Because I'm curious, now that you've described, the path, the search, the people you consulted, the work, the effort, the timeline, I'm curious how you got to the end. How did you get to sort of the investigating, adapting, celebrating structure?
Sure. So like I said, we wanted them to be active verbs, and that was a very conscious decision that we made, both coming from the majors who were writers who wanted something like that and the students who were more into the design of it. So we were talking about something called participatory culture, and it's the idea that you should feel welcome and able to participate in different spaces. So how do we build those spaces to be welcoming and to invoke participation? So we could have come out with words that just said investigate, adaptations, celebrations, teachers, and share online or something like that. But that would not to us have the same sort of feeling as these action verbs of celebrating and teaching and adapting. And we're hoping that by doing it this way, we would work towards inviting people to participate and see themselves in the site and as participants, as people that could help influence it, help provide content for it, or even help curate and manage it. That was really what our hope was. And from talking to different people, it was fantastic to have students in on some of these interviews with us. A student came with me to 221BCon to do some of that work also. And I brought my oldest daughter to the ASH meeting to kind of get her take on it. And a lot of those conclusions were that some people might see some of these different communities as almost exclusive and maybe kind of very literary or formal and maybe scary, right, to a newer generation. So a lot of the work that I was trying to do was consider my college students sort of the next audience that's coming along. So how do I get them to see what I was seeing? Because what I was seeing was a very kind group of people that were incredibly welcoming and very enthusiastic about Sherlock Holmes, and this had become their hobby, and if not their passion in life for a lot of people. So how do I represent that best? And so some of that was taking them to meetings. Some of it was having them listen to some of your podcasts to hear Chris Redmond speak in his own words or other people speak. And then taking them to see things like 221BCon and having them bring back stories for other people on the team. And they kind of got stuck into all of it, especially because, I had copies of adventures in the wide lab that they could look at, read, or borrow, or just take home to take a look at. And they would exchange and share them. And then when they started reading the content, it really kind of hooked them. Because I also challenged them to sort of write these overview paragraphs for different sections, and you couldn't write those early drafts without looking at the content, right? And learning about the community. And they really kind of got stuck in. And they all said, if I was a part of this, how would I be a part of this? And so that's really how we came to creating these different sections. Like, the canon and the canon being so important, well, it should have its own section. Even the students were very adamant about that. Let's have investigating be all about the canon, and then we can put these other sections, in their own place too. One of the most fantastic discussions I really think we had as a team was the whole pastiche and fan fiction and parody and satire debate about what was what and where does it go. And I think especially for the generation of my students, they almost see a flattening of a lot of that, and they see it all sort of having different value and similar value and fluctuation in value that I thought was a really good discussion for them and helped to shape what the sharing section looks like. And then Crystal Knoll came in, along with Kathy, to reimagine what the sharing section might look like, which was fantastic. And it created really good discussions with my students about how we categorize things, and how we organize them and what does it say about us. That was sort of our mantra. We have a weekly meeting where we meet on Tuesdays together just to talk about where are we with the project and what are we doing. And that was sort of our mantra, was that however we decide to categorize all of this information and organize it, we are going to be saying something by doing that. So let's make sure that we're saying the right thing and that it's representative of what this community believes these things are and how they're defined.
Yeah. Now, let me ask you a technical question here, because you mentioned the notion of participatory culture and it being very inviting, and I think it is. But I think one of the things, and this is me not being a digital native, but being a digital immigrant.
Those terms are false, just so you know. There's no such thing.
Well, and it's interesting
digital
because
native.
We look at our kids and we say, oh, they're digitally savvy, when in fact they are not, because they haven't gone through the same kind of evolution that those of us that have had to try things and fail and learn, and they're digitally dependent. They're not digitally savvy, right?
And and they don't always know what they're doing or how to do it, and that's normal. I mean, you wouldn't hand a car to a 16-year-old who never had driving lessons and be like, "Have at it, you'll be awesome."
Well, exactly. So, this notion of participatory, I think, is key, because at one point in my discussion with Chris, I mentioned turning at least part of the site into something of a wiki, where it could, because of the volume of content and because it's coming from so many different areas, it could be kept up by fans What did you and your students find with regard to something wiki-like rather than something that's more just updated by a central administration?
Yeah, and that's a really good question because it's something that we explored because we were part of this issue of scale is tremendous when you look at this site. There's hundreds of pages, but there's also 1,000 or so links. So how do you make sure that those are active and live? And part of that is something that we're going to do in wide to do our best to stay on top of the links and follow them as they get updated. But it was this debate in the beginning, and I think part of what we decided to do was keep with the spirit of what Chris was doing, in that this is a site, and it's an old school site. I had a friend of mine who's been online like myself since like the 80s and 90s and go and say, this site is so wonderful nostalgia for me of sort of the old websites that would keep all these links and tell you where the really cool stuff was. And I thought, over the weekend that really kind of crystallized it for me. And that's how I think of this site, is that this is a space that's really curated to welcome newcomers and sort of embrace experts and let them share their expertise. And I think that the reason why we decided not to do a wiki, number one, the Baker Street wiki is a thing, and it's maintained by fans. And so I think that is one space where this is happening. So fans who want to do that kind of work can go over to the Baker Street Wikia and participate in that way. But I think on our side, we were more thinking of the next generation of fans, or even those of us in our 40s who stumble upon this. How could we sort of help guide them into the spirit of what this community is all about? And I purposely say community rather than fandom or literary society, knowing that there's sort of different opinions on that.
Sure.
But by creating sort of this curated space by these different folks who really are experts in what they're looking at. So thinking about Crystal Knoll, understanding the sharing section, or Chris Sordan really knowing the celebrating section, and Jacqueline Morris, who's going to be managing the teaching section for us. These are, to me, people who are in our community that have a level of expertise, but also a strong network of other people that can help them improve on those sections. And so that was really important. P.S. We're still looking for someone to help with investigating and adapting.
Can you talk about that a little more?
Sure. So the investigating section is really all about canon and about Arthur Conan Doyle himself. And we're hoping that either one person or even a team of people could help us manage that section, keeping not just the links fresh, but finding new information for us that we might want to point newcomers or experts to go take a look at. And then the adapting section really focuses on any time Sherlock Holmes and the original stories of canon was adapted, whether it's film or a web series or audio books or graphic novels or even filk. I made a section on filk because so many people have songs that I thought would be so cool to try to include that in here. But plays, television shows, and I'm certain for adapting it might take several people to help manage that. But the idea is that we as Wide and me as Liza is going to continue to be the caretaker of the site. We're going to help with all sort of any kind of technical issues that come up. We build pages for people when they join as a curator and they say, oh, I have an idea. I want to build a page for this. We do that for you. It's all running in WordPress, which we chose WordPress purposely because of the plugins, but also because we knew that curators, that would probably be an easier platform for them and a platform they would know. And that was important to us. But as curators come on and want to help shape a different section, we give them access to that section. We have an internal guidebook about sort of different spelling conventions or things like that, or different ways to update your page. But we're very open and flexible as new people come on and help us manage the site.
Well, that's wonderful. And this, to me, is probably one of the most fascinating parts of it all. That is, you have a logo.
We do.
The site has an official logo. Tell us a little bit about that, how it came to be, and what the inspiration was.
Sure. So there's this really awesome website out there called the Noun Project. And it's just the Noun Project, and it's a bunch of icons, essentially, that different artists have created. And I use the Noun Project. Before I did things looking at different communities, I did a lot of research around social media and disaster, and I used a lot of these nouns to be able to explain these different events to people, because they're very sort of non-terrifying, I would say, these icons that they create. So what I ended up doing was one of my students, Hannah Countryman. She's fantastic. She's a designer, a visual designer, and she also does interaction design. And we sat together trying to figure out, Hannah and I, how could we come up with a logo? Like, would we hand draw something? I said, you know what, let's go out to the Noun Project together. And we did, and we found these awesome silhouettes of Holmes and Watson. And we're like, oh, this is it. This is fantastic. And she worked up a couple designs for us, and that's how we ended up with the one that's on the main page right now. It's also our logo. We've got little really nifty business cards that has the original illustrations on the back, and we have stickers as a way to sort of be eye-catching and tell people that the new site was coming. But Hannah put this together. I have zero visual design talents, and luckily I have Hannah, and she did this, and it's brilliant. I love it.
Well, I think there's an additional level of brilliance here to Hannah and her cleverness here, because obviously highly recognizable. You know, these two silhouettes facing each other, one in a deerstalker with a pipe. Gee, who could that be? And the other in a bowler. And you know, Watson, when we come across Watson, either by his own personal description in the canon, or even in any of the various adaptations he's been shown in, he is he's everyman. You know, he's a stalwart built man, square jaw, mustache. We know that, but this Watson, if you look very closely, not only does he not have a mustache, but he's also got glasses. And I think to all the portrayals of Watson that I'm familiar with, and it brings me back to Alan Cox in Young Sherlock Holmes. Right?
Oh, yes.
So here you've got the iconic Sherlock Holmes from the late 30s, early 40s that represents Sherlock Holmes to a number of generations, but that's old school Sherlock Holmes. And you've got this very young Watson that, even though it's not from the current era, still represents a younger kind of viewpoint on the characters. So you've got the gelling of the two right there in your logo.
Right.
So kudos to Hannah.
Yeah. And what's the name of this project? Noun Project?
The Noun Project.
How do you spell that?
So noun, as in person, place, or thing.
Oh, Noun
Project.
Yeah, if you just go to thenounproject.com, you can find all these icons, and some of them are under Creative Commons. Some of them, it costs you a couple dollars to download and use. Some care about the artist cares about getting acknowledged, some don't. But it's a really neat place, and we acknowledged the person who created our icons. It's at the bottom of the About page, which is the Watson page.
Cool.
Excellent.
And we have a Watson on this project too, which I think is awesome. Our student web developer and interface designer is Caleb Watson. And he showed up for this project, and I was like, what?
You're hired.
Exactly. And I kind of didn't want to point it out to him, because I thought, well, if he doesn't know, this could be embarrassing. And I always try to be conscious of that with my students. And I finally said, do you know? He's like, oh yes, I love these stories. It's my thing. So he's been he's been first of all, he's been amazing to watch Caleb over the last year just grow as a web developer, and his expertise in WordPress has been phenomenal. And just to see him sort of grow in his professionalization, but also in his love of all of this, it's really been awesome. He's completely been dedicated to this project and just amazing. But all of my students have been great. We've had Catherine Sullivan, who was early days. She did a lot of the early information architecture for us. We were a little concerned about her because at one point I think she had an IA document of like 40 pages long of how we were going to architect everything, and we were starting to get concerned for her health. Was she dreaming in the sitemaps? But she was just amazing and awesome. And we've had a local librarian, Ranti, who's helped us. A research assistant, Stephanie, and Subin, they've both been amazing. And then we've had content editors. The joy of having a professional writing program right in my department is, I've got students who know how to write really well and are happy to find all of the mistakes that we could dream of making. So it's been wonderful because I can write, but it's always difficult to catch your own errors, and they've just been on top of it, Bridget and Jessica, and it's just been, and Ray and Rebecca, who joined the project just a month ago, but did a ton of work for us in a short time. It's been amazing to work with these students, just wonderful.
I'll bet, and I'll tell you, they must be, well, they may not realize this yet. As much fun as they're having right now, I'm sure they appreciate that. This could be like the project of their careers.
Yes.
This is one of those things that you just fall into. Mm-hmm. And clearly, you did as well. You saw all of these dots, all of the stars aligned, and you made an effort. You responded to Chris's tweet, which reminds me, Sherlockian.net has its own Twitter handle now, doesn't it?
We do indeed. That was sort of a thing that it's kind of funny because the shoemaker's children have no shoes. I turned around last week and I was like, didn't we make a Twitter at some point? Doesn't this what I study for my life's work? So yes, Sherlockian has a Twitter. I need to start doing some things there. But it will be doing stuff, I swear. Yeah. Well,
fantastic.
and I guess part of the thing with Chris too was that I saw a moment where what could I actually do to help this community? Because I don't feel I'm anywhere near an expert as everyone else is, which I'm sure is something everyone new to this feels in their heart. It's like, wow, that the level of detail is amazing. I don't have that. But I do know how to do this. So this is something I could do for the community and give back in that way. And support the work that we're doing in the lab. Well,
it's not that much different from what Holmes himself did. He knew he couldn't go everywhere and overhear everyone, so he enlisted the irregulars to be his hands and feet and eyes and ears.
Right, so right.
You're following in a fine pattern.
Thank you.
Wow. So what's next with the project?
That is an interesting question. Everyone's allowed to take the week off.
That's it?
I know.
Come on, this is the internet. We don't sleep.
Exactly. Yeah. I know that we want to work. There's some pieces of the sharing section that we want to flesh out more. And I know that Chris Sordan is very interested in continuing to flesh out the celebrating section and add some more things in there. I was doing a lot of the work in adapting. I sent an email to you about making sure that I understood all the radio shows. I had a fantastic conversation with Howard Ostrom about his list of folks who have performed as Sherlock Holmes, which is amazing. I'm not sure. He sent me the list of it all, and it was just tremendous. I'm not quite sure what he wants to do with it next. But there's also a few different projects that people have kind of sent my way since taking on Sherlockian. For example, the BSI list of investitures. There's a few of us that get that list to keep it up to date. And something I've been thinking about is how could I kind of help with that better? Mm-hmm. Maybe using different technology that we might deploy at MSU. I mean, something as simple as even a Google spreadsheet to sort of help people organize.
Right.
But just so those sorts of things, like how can I use technology in different ways to help connect the community better? So continuing to build out what we have for sure, and making sure that we continue to show up to meetings and spaces and places and make sure that we got this right and that we understand what we're doing better.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if we can speak on behalf of the Sherlockian community, and I hope that we can, we would say that to your project leaders, to your students, and to anyone in general, all are welcome. You know, this is something that we share in the wider world. Sherlock Holmes is a figure of the globe, and why shouldn't we all enjoy ourselves more and enjoy the stories and enjoy everything that comes with them by connecting with each other? Yes, there's a lot of tradition. Yes, there's a lot that's been done before you were even thought of, but there is still more yet to be done, and this is why we want the next generation to join us and to be part of it.
Definitely. Thank you for saying that.
Well,
definitely.
We all feel that way, but sometimes it just needs to be expressed. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily come off that way, as some of your students may have perceived.
Yeah, and there was this really magical moment for me. I was at 221 BCon, and there was a session that was, I forget the name of it, but it was essentially like, it's a newcomer session. Are you new to Sherlock Holmes? And sort of like, maybe you would come to it in different ways, like watching the Sherlock show or something else, or maybe the Robert Downey Jr. films. And I went to this session, and this was sort of when I noticed that the conference was different. There was almost a call and response going on from the presenters explaining how they got into Sherlock Holmes, and different people in the audience sort of talking back to that, and this really lively, fantastic, welcoming banter that went on. And part of it was Marilyn McKay running up and down the aisles, handing out essentially free Dover editions of the adventures and saying, you've got to read the canon. It's just so great. And you wouldn't, it's lively and it's funny and it's great. And you've got to get into it. And just watching her energy around that and the whole room's energy and how happy people were to get a copy of it.
Yeah.
And I was like, what is this? This is such a vibrant, amazing community. This is awesome. I need to be a part of this.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, thank you for what you're doing. I should mention that you also established a board of advisors to help guide the initial parts of the project and kind of be the guardrails along the way.
Yes.
I was honored to be selected as part of that, but we should mention who the other folks on that are. They include, of course, Chris Redmond himself, as he still does have a little bit of skin in the game. Matthias Bostrom from Sweden, who we talked with a couple of episodes ago. Glenn Moranker, whom folks may remember from episode 79. Jacqueline Morris, the founder of Scintillation of Scions. We talked with her, I think it was episode 105. Crystal Knoll from 221B Con, who you mentioned. Ashley Polisek, another Baker Street babe and heavily involved in the space. And, of course, Tamar Zephyrin, who herself, by profession, is an archivist. So what a wonderful collection of people with a variety of insights that you put together to help be the the Jiminy Cricket of your project, shall we say?
Yeah, the wise counsel. I'm just delighted that everyone I approached said yes, and had more names for me and more interest for me, and just a constant source of encouragement, information and connections. I used to work in industry doing different website design and working through the whole boom and bust and startups and all that stuff. And if there was one thing I learned, it was find people smarter than you every single time. So people with more knowledge than you, people have done these things before. And it was so important to me to make sure that if we were going to do this, we had people on board who had sort of the wisdom and knowledge of the community and of the topic itself. So it's been just it's overwhelming when I think of it, to know that people entrusted me to do this, and that I had their support in doing it, and I could pick up the phone and ask a question real quick. Even in a Facebook chat, I would have a question for Tamar or Jacqueline and get an answer, and just be able to keep going like that for the students was phenomenal. And the students even had conversations where I would say, okay, I'm gonna ask Ashley about, because she helped a lot with the scholarship about Sherlock Holmes, and so here's a professor at another institution doing this work. And that was really helpful to situate this for the students too, to know who these people were, and that we had their trust in what we were doing and the responsibility to do right by it. So that was incredibly helpful for me and for the students. And
clearly we're all insane. So that helped.
Well, it helped to have that passion, right?
Right. Well, right.
So,
that's what
which is just, it inspires you to want to do a good job, and it connects it as a real thing that's happening with the students. Like, when they sat in on the board meeting, they were like, wow, these people, they're amazing. They know what they're doing and what they're talking about. We can't screw this up, So like, you're not going to screw this up. We're going to do a great job. And they're like, this is so much bigger than us. And I think that you don't always get to have something like this, a project that you can show students that the things that you're teaching them in the classroom, there's an application to that, and letting them see that happen. So I think it's just been phenomenal all around for all of us. Very grateful.
Excellent. Well, from the Sherlockian community to them and everyone that has touched the project, a hearty and sincere thank you from the bottom of our Sherlockian hearts.
Thank you. It's been our pleasure.
You hardly ever see somebody whose professional and personal interests align so supremely. Yeah. That was uncanny.
Well, it's it's just a fabulous work product. I have to admit that until today, I didn't look at the current Sherlockian.net. And so you there, listeners, if you have not looked at Sherlockian.net, what a lovely time to go do that. And it shows you, it's a little window into what the web is capable of, but it's also a little window into what 6 to 9 students and a great academic leader can accomplish in terms of architecting, presenting, curating, showcasing information, and providing a guide, and very appropriately expressed as a portal for Sherlock Holmes. And it's a real treat.
Indeed.
And I love her energy and her view on all of this. It's fabulous.
Well, you have to have energy to take this project on, no question. Yeah. To think that Christopher Redmond did this for 22 years, and kept it up and kept adding to it. No wonder he was ready to put it to death. So that's it. Just perfect. Really, it's just perfect. So, and you really haven't missed much, Bert, because the site only switched over to its newest form on Friday, October 27th. So this is...
Oh, my goodness. I had no idea.
This is brand spanking new.
Oh, hallelujah.
New and improved.
Yeah. New and improved, yeah.
So there you have it. When you first heard the name of the Baker Street Journal, what was your reaction? Be honest. Did you think someone meant to say the Wall Street Journal? Or maybe you thought it was a chronicle of Jerry Rafferty's challenges in creating his iconic song. Or perhaps some lurid details of John Three Continents Watson and his romantic conquests for which the world is not yet prepared. Well, all of those are wrong on a number of levels. No, the Baker Street Journal is simply a place to find some of the world's leading Sherlockian scholarship. And not of the stuck-up, hard-to-understand variety. No, these are articles that are by turn entertaining, informative, and thought-provoking. Just the kind of thing you'd expect to hear from other Sherlockians. And Jerry Rafferty. Isn't it time that you added a subscription to the BSJ to your shopping list? We think so. Just head over to bakerstreetjournal.com and add your name to our list today. Well, and here you have us. We're getting to the tail end of the show here. Glad to have you here listening to both of our sponsors, both Wessex Press and the Baker Street Journal, as you just heard there. We would be remiss if we did not remark that you need to help us out. We're not going to ask you for money right now. We're not going to ask you to comment or to get in touch with us. We're going to ask you one thing, and one thing only. Leave us a rating or review on the podcast listening platform of your choice. Could be iTunes, could be Google, wherever you listen to your podcast. Please leave us a rating or review. Let other people know what you think about I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, and do the same for our companion podcast, Trifles. If you haven't had a chance to listen over there, it's at SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. That's where you can find it. It's called Sherlock Holmes Trifles, and we do that weekly, and we talk about some of the minutiae in the stories, some of the things that you may have missed the first couple times around, and we pick those apart until our fingers bleed. And hopefully your ears don't.
Yes, it's a lot of fun. It's short, it's brief, and you never know what you're going to find. And we are having a surprisingly large amount of fun producing it.
As opposed to this sucker. No.
Which is a labor.
It is a labor, and it is as Liza said, you have to have passion to do this stuff, and we are passionate about Sherlock Holmes.
The game's afoot.
I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I am neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.
How did you get to this particular spot, this program at the Michigan?
So Michigan State's program is a top program in the nation for what I do. And I grew up in Florida and New Jersey. My dad grew up outside of Philly. But in between that, I lived out in Washington State. I worked for Microsoft for a bit, and I worked I went to school in upstate New York at a place called Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute.
Oh, sure, RPI.
Yeah. And then I went down to Philly again and worked for a design consultancy. And then I came into the academy. And part of it was there was something that a colleague of mine, who was actually an employee of mine, said to me, and more than one of them had said this to me, is like, you're really good at mentoring people, and you're never going to be able to scale if you stay in industry doing this. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to make real change, you have to think about becoming an academic and a professor. And I was like, what? Really? Because it's funny, when I graduated undergrad with an English major, I thought, okay, I'm going to become an English professor and wear elbow patches and a life of literature my whole life, having no idea what any of this was. And I think it was like U.S. News and World Report, the top 5 worst jobs. Number 3 was English professor the year I graduated. So I was like, okay, I guess I'm not doing that. And I had been writing technical documents for a couple software companies while I was in college. I was like, well, I always knew computers and I can write. So why don't I just stick with this? And, long story short, I did a program with RPI at a distance, and I had a really awesome professor there, and he was like, why don't you come get your PhD? And it was the same time I was at Microsoft. I wanted to move into usability engineering. I was a project manager, and the only way to get over to usability engineering at that point, they had grandfathered in some people, but I wasn't there long enough. You had to go get a PhD. So I was like, okay, fine. So I went to upstate New York. I got a PhD, but what ended up happening along the way is my first semester, I was mainly there to do technical things, but my first semester I had a class on cultural studies, and it ruined everything because I suddenly realized, oh God, there's people and there's different cultures, and what am I thinking? The way we design is all wrong. So I started off at a small school, a state school. And then I ended up getting hired. They essentially created a position for me at MSU, and I ran and I took it. And when I came up here to visit, it was very funny. We'd never live in it, we survived living in upstate New York. I figured we could live in Michigan. And it was very funny because when I did the interview, I'm like, I don't need to see the area. I don't need to see the neighborhood because this is the top program. And if I get hired, we're going and it doesn't matter. So it was a huge leap of faith, but we absolutely love living in Michigan. To me, it's a phenomenal place to raise children. Where we live is very kid oriented. But yeah, so our program is wacky because we're not in an English department, which is rare for writing programs. And we're very technology and culture focused. So, I'm exactly where I want to be.
Well, compared to RPI, Michigan's like Florida.
Yes, indeed. I'll never forget the first year I was there, they had a blizzard, and I didn't understand what snow really was, and I didn't fully get it that we lived on Hoth. So they had a blizzard, and I'm like, I have to go get my books. I have a paper due. And me and my husband went down to campus from where we lived, and we're like, what is this? It was just, we were covered and coated, like sloshing our way, trying to get to my office. And right next to my office, they're playing a football game. What are they doing? What is this? And so it was like known as like one of the Blizzard Bowls that they play. Like, I don't understand.
Yeah, see, the thing they didn't tell you was it started out as a baseball game.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah, RPI is a very interesting place. The on-campus chapel was converted into the on-campus computing center. So that pretty much tells you everything you need to know about RPI.
All hail.